When Cole Merrick rode into the burning remains of the Warren homestead that scorching August evening, he expected to find only death. The Comanche raiders had been thorough, bodies scattered, buildings reduced to ash, silence thick as blood. But then he heard it, a breath, faint as a whisper, beneath the collapsed barn timbers. A woman, crushed and broken, her lips moving with a single word. Samuel. Cole knelt in the smoke and made a promise that would change everything. You're still breathing, that's enough. Stay with me until the end of this story and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The Texas sun hung low and angry on the horizon, painting the sky the color of old blood. Cole Merrick had seen that particular shade before, too many times, and it never meant anything good. His horse, a sturdy buckskin named Jonah, picked his way carefully through the scrub brush, ears swiveling at every sound that cut through the oppressive heat. Cole had been riding for 3 days straight, following the trail of smoke that rose like a dark pillar against the cloudless sky. He'd hoped it was just a controlled burn, maybe some rancher clearing land. But the closer he got, the more that hope withered like the parched grass beneath Jonah's hooves. The smell hit him first, that unmistakable mixture of burned wood, scorched earth, and something worse. Something that made his stomach turn even after all these years on the frontier. Cole pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth, but it did little to filter the acrid air. "Easy, boy," he murmured to Jonah, feeling the horse's muscles tense beneath him. Animals knew. They always knew when death was near. The Warren homestead, or what remained of it, came into view as Cole crested a small rise. His jaw tightened beneath the bandana. He'd seen raids before, plenty of them, but the thoroughness of this destruction spoke to rage beyond simple theft or territory dispute. The main house was nothing but a blackened skeleton, timbers still glowing orange in places. The barn had collapsed entirely, and the smaller outbuildings were just piles of ash and stone. Bodies lay where they'd fallen. Cole counted 4 from where he sat, 3 men and what looked like a young boy, no more than 12. The raiders hadn't bothered to hide their work. Why would they? Out here, justice was as scarce as water in a drought. Cole dismounted slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver at his hip. The raid was hours old, maybe more, but caution had kept him alive this long. He ground-tied Jonah near a half-standing fence post and began walking through the ruins, his boots crunching on debris and broken glass. The heat from the smoldering wreckage pressed against him like a physical force. Sweat ran down his back, mixing with the trail dust that covered him like a second skin. He'd been riding since before dawn, and exhaustion pulled at his bones, but he couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until he'd checked for survivors, though survivors seemed as likely as rain. He moved methodically through the destruction, checking each body, saying a silent prayer over each one. The men had died fighting. Their weapons were still clutched in stiffening hands, spent shells scattered around them. The boy had been running toward the creek when an arrow had found his back. Cole closed the child's eyes gently and stood, his fists clenched. "Damn it all to hell," he whispered. He was about to head back to Jonah to ride for the nearest settlement and report the massacre when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost convinced himself it was just the wind through the ruins. But there it was again, a soft, rattling breath, barely audible over the crackle of dying flames. Cole's head snapped toward the collapsed barn. He stood frozen for a heartbeat, listening with every fiber of his being. There, again. Definitely breathing, and it was coming from beneath the massive pile of burned timbers that had once been a roof. "Jesus," he breathed, already running. He reached the edge of the debris and dropped to his knees, ignoring the heat that seared through his pants. "Hello, can you hear me? Hello?" The breathing continued, ragged and weak, but no voice answered. Cole began pulling at the timbers, his hands immediately blistering from the hot wood. He worked frantically, tossing aside boards and shingles, some still warm enough to burn. "Hang on," he called out, not knowing if anyone could hear him. "I'm coming, just hang on." It took him 10 minutes of brutal work to clear enough debris to see her. A woman, maybe 25 years old, pinned beneath a massive beam that had fallen across her midsection and legs. Her dress was torn and burned, her dark hair matted with blood and soot. Her face was pale as death itself, but her lips were moving. Cole leaned in close, his ear nearly touching her mouth. "Samuel," she whispered, the word barely formed. "Samuel." "Ma'am?" Cole said urgently. "Ma'am, can you hear me? I'm going to get you out of here." Her eyes fluttered open, dark brown, almost black, and filled with such pain that Cole felt it in his own chest. She looked at him without recognition, without real awareness, and those eyes began to close again. "No," Cole said sharply, gently touching her shoulder. "Stay with me. You hear me? Stay awake." He stood and examined the beam. It was easily 200 pounds of solid oak, charred but still intact. If he tried to lever it off and it slipped, it could crush her completely. But if he left to get help, if he could even find help within a day's ride, she'd be dead before he returned. Cole took off his hat and ran a hand through his sweat-soaked hair, thinking fast. He needed leverage. His eyes scanned the ruins and landed on a length of iron pipe, probably from the barn's old water pump. It wasn't much, but it might work. He grabbed the pipe and wedged it under the beam, using a large stone as a fulcrum. "This is going to hurt," he told the woman, though he doubted she could hear him anymore. "I'm sorry." Cole threw all his weight onto the pipe. The beam shifted, rising an inch, then two. His muscles screamed in protest, his back feeling like it might snap. But he kept pushing. The beam rose another precious inch. "Come on," he grunted through clenched teeth. "Come on, damn you." With a groan of stressed wood, the beam suddenly lifted higher. Cole couldn't hold it long. His arms were already shaking with the strain. He had maybe 10 seconds before his strength gave out entirely. "Ma'am," he gasped, "you've got to move. Pull yourself out, now." But she didn't move. She couldn't move. Cole realized with sinking dread that she was either unconscious or too injured to help herself. He was going to have to do this differently. He let the beam down slowly, his mind racing. Then he saw it. A heavy chain, probably used for hauling, half buried in the ash near the barn's entrance. If he could loop it under her arms. Cole worked quickly, wrapping the chain around the woman's torso and under her arms, trying to be as gentle as possible, but knowing speed mattered more than comfort right now. She moaned softly when he moved her, a sound that twisted something in his chest. "I know," he said softly. "I know it hurts." Almost done. He secured the chain and then wrapped the other end around his saddle horn. Jonah, bless his steady heart, hadn't moved an inch. Cole led the horse away from the barn, keeping the chain taut but not pulling yet. Back at the beam, Cole positioned the pipe again. "All right, God," he muttered. "If you're listening, a little help would be appreciated." He pushed down on the pipe with everything he had. The beam lifted. The second it was high enough, he whistled sharply, a signal he'd trained Jonah to recognize. The horse backed up steadily, and the chain went taut. For a horrible moment, nothing happened. Then, inch by inch, the woman's body began to slide across the ash-covered ground, pulling free from beneath the beam. Cole held the beam up, his vision starting to blur with the effort, his arms feeling like they were being torn from their sockets. The woman's feet cleared the beam. Cole dropped the pipe and staggered backward, falling hard on his rear as the beam crashed down with a thunderous boom that sent sparks and ash flying into the air. For a long moment, Cole just sat there, his chest heaving, his arms hanging useless at his sides. Then he forced himself to his feet and stumbled over to where the woman lay, still tangled in the chain. She was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was still breathing. Cole gently removed the chain and did a quick assessment. Her left leg was clearly broken, bent at an angle that made him wince. She had burns on her arms and side, and a deep gash across her forehead that had bled considerably. Her breathing was shallow and ragged, suggesting possible internal injuries or broken ribs. "You're still breathing," Cole said quietly, almost to himself. He brushed a strand of singed hair from her face. "That's enough. That's enough for now." He knew he had to move her, had to get her away from this place of death and to somewhere he could properly tend her injuries. The nearest town was Riverton, but that was a hard 2-day ride north, and she wouldn't survive the journey. His own camp was hidden in a canyon about 5 miles east, rough terrain, but much closer. Cole fetched his bedroll from Jonah's saddle and spread it on the ground. As carefully as he could, He lifted the woman onto it. She was lighter than he'd expected, all sharp angles and delicate bones beneath the ruined dress. She didn't wake, which he took as both a blessing and a curse. He wrapped her in the bedroll like a cocoon, then faced the grim task of improvising a travois. Using the remaining blankets, some rope, and 2 straight pieces of timber he salvaged from the ruins, Cole fashioned a crude but functional carrier that he attached to Jonah's saddle. The sun was touching the horizon now, bleeding the last light from the day. Cole took one more look at the bodies scattered across the homestead. He should bury them, he knew that. It was the decent thing to do. But the woman's breathing was getting shallower, and every minute counted. "I'm sorry," he said to the dead. "I'll come back. I promise." He secured the woman on the travois, making sure she was as stable as possible, and swung up into the saddle. Jonah started forward at Cole's gentle urging, moving slowly to minimize the bumping of the travois. They traveled east as the stars began to emerge, countless and cold. Cole kept glancing back at his passenger, checking that she was still breathing, still fighting. Every few minutes her lips would move, forming that same word, Samuel. "Who's Samuel?" Cole asked, though he expected no answer. "Your husband. Your brother?" He thought about the bodies back at the homestead. One of them must have been Samuel. The young boy, maybe, or one of the men. Whoever he was gone now, and this woman would wake up, if she woke up, to a world where everything she'd known was ash and memory. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed into the foothills. Cole knew this country well, had been riding it for the better part of 10 years, ever since he'd left Missouri with nothing but a horse, a gun, and the clothes on his back. The canyon he called camp was hidden behind a jumble of red rocks that looked impassable unless you knew the trick of it. It was full dark when they finally reached the narrow entrance. Cole dismounted and led Jonah through the tight passage, the travois scraping occasionally against the rock walls. Then they were through, emerging into a sheltered canyon about 100 feet across, with high walls on 3 sides and a small spring bubbling up from the rocks at the far end. Cole had been using this place as a base camp for months. He had a tent set up, a fire ring surrounded by rocks, and various supplies stashed in waterproof bags. It wasn't much, but it was hidden and it was safe, and right now that was all that mattered. He quickly built up the fire, needing the light more than the warmth in the still hot evening. Then he carefully lifted the woman from the travois and carried her to his tent, laying her on his own bedroll inside. By the firelight streaming through the tent opening, Cole got his first good look at her injuries. The broken leg was bad. He'd have to set it, and soon. The burns were second degree at worst, painful, but not life-threatening if he could prevent infection. The head wound had stopped bleeding, but would need cleaning and stitching. But it was her breathing that worried him most. Shallow and irregular, sometimes stopping altogether for a terrifying few seconds before starting again. Broken ribs, definitely, and possibly internal bleeding. Cole fetched his medical supplies, a battered tin box he'd carried since the war, containing bandages, a needle and thread, some carbolic acid for disinfecting, and a small bottle of laudanum. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He started with the burns, gently cleaning them with water from the spring and applying a salve made from herbs he'd learned about from a Kiowa medicine woman years ago. The woman didn't wake, didn't even flinch, and Cole wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Next came the head wound. He cleaned it thoroughly with the carbolic acid, then began the delicate work of stitching it closed. His hands were steady. They'd done this before, too many times on too many battlefields. The war had been over for 10 years, but some skills you never forgot. 12 stitches, he murmured when he finished cutting the thread. You'll have a scar, but you'll heal. The leg was the worst of it. Cole took a deep breath and began the process of setting the break. He'd done this before too, but it never got easier. The bone had snapped cleanly, which was fortunate, but getting it aligned properly made him sweat almost as much as lifting that beam had. He used 2 straight branches as splints, padding them with strips of cloth torn from his spare shirt, and bound the leg tightly. It wasn't hospital-quality work, but it would hold. As he worked, the woman began to stir, soft moans escaping her lips. Cole mixed a small dose of laudanum with water and gently lifted her head, pressing the cup to her lips. "Drink," he urged quietly. "It'll help with the pain." Most of the liquid dribbled down her chin, but some made it past her lips. Within a few minutes, she quieted again, sinking into a deeper sleep. Cole sat back on his heels, exhausted. His hands were shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed, the adrenaline draining away and leaving him hollow. He looked at the woman lying on his bedroll, her face cleaned of soot now, revealing delicate features and a scattering of freckles across her nose. Young, maybe younger than he'd first thought, mid-20s at most. Who was she? What had she been doing at that homestead? And who the hell was Samuel? Cole stepped out of the tent and walked to the spring where he splashed cold water on his face and neck. The night was cool now, the temperature dropping fast the way it did in the high desert. Stars blazed overhead, indifferent to the small dramas of human suffering below. He thought about the massacre he'd witnessed. The efficiency of it suggested Comanche raiders, probably a small war party moving fast through the territory. They'd struck at sunset when people were tired and less vigilant. They'd killed everyone they could find, taken what they wanted, and burned the rest. But they'd missed one. Somehow, impossibly, they'd missed the woman who now lay fighting for her life in his tent. Cole returned to the tent and checked on her again. Her breathing was still shallow but seemed slightly more regular. He touched the back of his hand to her forehead, warm but not feverish. Not yet, anyway. He should sleep, he knew. He was exhausted, and tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But every time he started to close his eyes, he found himself checking to make sure she was still breathing, still fighting. "Who are you?" he asked the unconscious woman. "And what am I supposed to do with you?" The fire crackled outside, sending shadows dancing across the tent walls. Cole finally allowed himself to stretch out on the ground near the tent entrance, his gun within easy reach, his ears attuned to any change in the woman's breathing. Sleep came in fits and starts, full of dreams about burning buildings and the faces of dead men he'd known during the war. Every hour or so, he'd wake and check on his patient, giving her sips of water when he could, adjusting her position to keep her comfortable. Just before dawn, when the sky was turning from black to deep blue, the woman's eyes suddenly opened. She stared straight up at the tent ceiling, her expression blank with confusion and pain. Cole was at her side instantly. "Easy," he said softly. "Don't try to move. You're safe now." Her eyes slowly focused on his face. She stared at him for a long moment, then her lips moved. "Samuel?" Cole's heart sank. "No, ma'am. My name's Cole. Cole Merrick. I found you at the homestead." Something flickered in her eyes. Memory returning, perhaps, or understanding. Tears began to roll down her temples, disappearing into her hair. "The raid," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They came at sunset. We tried to fight, but there were so many—" A sob caught in her throat. "Samuel, my brother. He told me to hide in the barn, but then it was burning and I couldn't get out. And—" "Shh," Cole said gently, taking her hand. "Don't. Not yet. You need to rest." "Samuel," she said again, and this time it was a keening sound, full of grief and loss. "My brother. He's dead, isn't he? They're all dead." Cole wanted to lie, to give her some comfort, but he'd never been good at lying. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry." She closed her eyes, more tears streaming down her face. Her hand gripped his with surprising strength. "Then let me die too. Please, I can't bear this." "No," Cole said firmly. "You listen to me. You're still breathing. You understand? You're still alive, and that means something. That means you fight." "For what?" she asked bitterly, her eyes opening again. "Everyone I loved is gone. Everything we built is ashes. What's left to fight for?" Cole was silent for a moment, thinking about all the times he'd asked himself the same question. After the war, when he'd come home to find his family's farm abandoned, his parents dead from fever, his brother lost at Shiloh, he'd stood in the ruins of his old life and asked the same thing. "What's left?" "I don't know, he finally said, honest and rough. "But you're breathing, and while you're breathing, there's a chance. Maybe that's enough." She looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "What's your name?" Cole asked. "Lydia," she whispered. Lydia Warren. Well, Miss Warren, I'm going to do everything I can to keep you alive. But you've got to help me. You've got to want to live. I don't know if I can, she said, but her hand was still gripping his. Then just keep breathing, Cole told her. Just that. One breath, then another. We'll figure out the rest as we go. The sun was rising now, sending golden light streaming into the canyon. Cole heard birds beginning their morning songs, oblivious to human tragedy. Life went on, indifferent and relentless. Lydia's eyes closed again, but this time it was just sleep, not unconsciousness. Cole sat beside her, still holding her hand, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Each breath was a small victory, a refusal to surrender. He'd found her in the ruins, more dead than alive. He'd made a promise in the smoke and blood. You're still breathing. That's enough. Now in the clean light of morning, he had to figure out what came next, because keeping someone breathing was one thing. Teaching them to want to live again, that was something else entirely. But as Cole watched the dawn paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and red, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. This woman, this stranger, needed him. And maybe, just maybe, he needed her too. The frontier was hard and unforgiving, but it was also where people remade themselves, where new lives were built from the ashes of old ones. If Lydia Warren could survive the night, maybe she could survive everything else too. Cole stood and walked to the canyon entrance, looking out at the vast expanse of Texas spread before him. Somewhere out there, raiders were moving on to their next target. Somewhere out there, other families were going about their lives, unaware of how quickly everything could burn. But here, in this hidden canyon, one woman had been given a second chance. Cole intended to make damn sure she got to use it. He turned back to the tent where Lydia slept and began planning what came next. There would be fever to fight, wounds to tend, and eventually, if she survived, hard conversations about what remained of her life and where she would go from here. But that was tomorrow's worry. Today, she was breathing. Today, that was enough. The fever came that afternoon, just as Cole had feared it would. He'd been boiling water over the fire, preparing to change Lydia's bandages, when he heard her start to thrash inside the tent. By the time he reached her side, she was burning up, her skin hot enough to make him pull his hand back in alarm. No, 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 Cole muttered, pressing his palm to her forehead again to confirm what he already knew. The fever was high, dangerously high. Her body was fighting the infection from her wounds, and losing. Lydia's eyes were open but unseeing, staring at something only she could perceive. Her lips moved constantly, forming words that made no sense. The barn's on fire, she mumbled. Samuel, run. You have to run. Cole grabbed claws and soaked them in the cold spring water, laying them across her forehead and neck. He'd seen fever like this before during the war. Sometimes men survived it. Often they didn't. Listen to me, Lydia, he said urgently, gripping her hand. You're not at the homestead. You're safe. There's no fire here. But she couldn't hear him. She was back in that burning barn, reliving the raid over and over. They're coming through the door, she whispered, her voice high with terror. Samuel's trying to hold them back, but there's too many. Too many. Cole worked through the afternoon and into the evening, changing the cold compresses every few minutes, forcing water between her lips whenever she was coherent enough to swallow. He checked her wounds obsessively, looking for signs of infection. The burns were red and angry looking, and the area around her broken leg was swollen and hot to the touch. He mixed a poultice using what herbs he had: yarrow for the fever, comfrey for the swelling, and a bit of willow bark tea for the pain. It was frontier medicine, learned from necessity and desperation, but it was all he had. As night fell, the fever climbed higher. Lydia began to convulse, her body rigid with spasms that made Cole's stomach twist. He held her down as gently as he could, terrified that she'd injure herself further, more terrified that her heart would simply give out under the strain. Come on, he said through gritted teeth. You didn't survive that raid just to die in my tent. Fight, damn it. Fight. The hours blurred together. Cole lost track of time, marking its passage only by the changing position of the stars, visible through the tent opening. He talked to Lydia constantly, not knowing if she could hear him, but unable to bear the silence. My name's Cole Merrick, he said, as he replaced another warm compress with a cold one. I'm from Missouri originally, little town called Independence. My pa had a farm there. corn mostly, some cattle. It wasn't much, but it was home. He wrung out another cloth, the water running warm over his hands. I had a brother named Thomas. Tom, we called him. He was younger than me by 3 years, but he was always the brave one. When the war came, he couldn't wait to sign up, thought it'd be a grand adventure. Lydia moaned softly, her head turning from side to side. Cole continued, his voice steady and low. Tom died at Shiloh. Never even saw what hit him, they said. I was there, but in a different regiment. Didn't find out until 2 weeks later. He paused, remembering. By the time I got back home after the war, my parents were gone too. Fever took them in the winter of '64. The farm was abandoned. Everything we'd built just gone. He looked down at Lydia's flushed face. So I understand what you're feeling right now, that emptiness. Like someone scooped out your insides and left just a shell. I know it. Around midnight, Lydia's convulsions stopped. For one horrible moment, Cole thought she'd died. But then he saw the slight rise and fall of her chest. The fever hadn't broken, but it had plateaued. It was something. Cole allowed himself to step outside for a moment, breathing in the cool night air. His back ached from bending over Lydia. His hands were raw from wringing out cloths in cold water, and exhaustion made his vision blur. But he couldn't rest. Not yet. He gathered more wood for the fire, boiled more water, prepared more compresses. The night stretched on, vast and uncaring. Somewhere out there, the men who'd done this to Lydia were sleeping peacefully under the same stars. The injustice of it made Cole's jaw clench. Just before dawn, when the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, Lydia's eyes opened with sudden clarity. She looked directly at Cole, and for the first time since he'd found her, she seemed to really see him. "Water," she whispered, her voice like dried leaves. Cole nearly knocked over the water bucket in his haste. He lifted her head carefully and held the cup to her lips. She drank greedily, then coughed, her body curling with the pain it caused. "Easy," Cole said. "Not too fast." When she'd had enough, he lowered her head back down. She stared at him, confusion and pain warring in her eyes. "You're real," she said. I thought you were a fever dream." "I'm real," Cole confirmed. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," she said, then winced. "My leg. Broken." I said it as best I could. "You've also got burns, a head wound, and probably some cracked ribs." He paused. "You've been fevered for near about 12 hours now." Lydia closed her eyes, and Cole saw tears leak from beneath her lids. "Samuel," she breathed. "I remember now. All of it." Cole said nothing. Sometimes there were no words sufficient to answer grief. "He was only 19, Lydia continued, her voice breaking. "My baby brother, he was going to go to college back east, study engineering. He was so smart, Cole, so full of life and plans, and—" She couldn't finish. Cole reached out and took her hand, holding it firmly. "I'm sorry." They sat in silence for a long moment, Lydia crying softly, Cole simply being present. Finally, she opened her eyes again and looked at him. "Why did you save me?" The question caught Cole off guard. "What kind of question is that? You don't know me. You could have just ridden on. Saving me has brought you nothing but trouble." Cole shook his head. "You were alive. That's all the reason I needed." "But I don't want to be alive," Lydia said, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Don't you understand? Everyone I loved is dead. Everything we worked for is destroyed. I have nothing left. Nothing." "You have your life," Cole said firmly. "And as long as you have that, you have possibilities. You have choices. You have—" "I have pain," Lydia interrupted bitterly. "I have grief. I have memories that will haunt me until I die. That's what I have." Cole was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. 3 years ago, I stood in the ruins of my family's farm and put a gun to my head. I had every reason to pull that trigger. My family was gone. The life I'd known was over, and I couldn't see any reason to keep going. Lydia's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. "I stood there for maybe an hour with that gun pressed right here," Cole continued, touching his temple. "And you know what stopped me? A damn bird. A meadowlark sitting on what was left of our fence, singing like the world wasn't ending. And I thought, if that bird can sing in the ruins, maybe I can take one more breath. Then another, then another. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. I'm not going to lie to you, Lydia. The pain doesn't go away. The grief doesn't disappear. But you learn to carry it. You learn to live alongside it, and eventually, maybe, you find new reasons to keep breathing. I don't know if I'm that strong, Lydia whispered. You are, Cole said with certainty. You survived a raid that killed everyone else. You survived being trapped under burning timbers. You survived fever that should have killed you. You're stronger than you think. Lydia was silent for a long time, staring up at the tent ceiling. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely audible. What happens now? Now you rest, Cole said. You heal, and when you're strong enough, we'll figure out the next step. Where are we? My camp. It's hidden, about 5 miles east of your homestead. I couldn't take you to town, too far, and you wouldn't have survived the journey. Lydia turned her head slightly, taking in her surroundings. How long have I been here? This is your second day. Cole stood and stretched, his joints popping. I need to change your bandages. It's going to hurt. Everything already hurts, Lydia said wearily. Cole worked carefully, unwrapping the bandages on her burns. The wounds looked better than he'd feared, red and painful, but not showing signs of serious infection. The head wound was clean, the stitches holding. Her broken leg was another matter. The swelling had gone down some, but it was still hot to the touch. Lydia bit her lip to keep from crying out as Cole applied fresh salve and new bandages, but small whimpers escaped despite her efforts. By the time he finished, she was shaking and sweating, though her fever had finally started to break. I need to ask you something, Cole said as he cleaned up the soiled bandages. At your homestead, was there a root cellar or anywhere you might have stored important papers, deeds, letters, anything like that? Lydia's brow furrowed. There was a cellar under the house. Why? Because if your land deed survived, you might still have a claim to that property. Without it, he trailed off, but the implication was clear. Samuel kept important documents in a metal box, Lydia said slowly, remembering. He was paranoid about fires. He always kept it in the cellar, wrapped in oilcloth. A small spark of hope lit in Cole's chest. That box might have survived then. The cellar would have been somewhat protected from the fire. What good does it do me? Lydia asked bitterly. Even if the deed survived, I can't work that land alone. I can barely walk. You'll walk again, Cole said with confidence. It'll take time, but you'll heal. And as for working the land, he paused, not sure why he was about to make this offer. We'll figure something out. Lydia looked at him suspiciously. Why are you helping me? Really? Men don't just help strange women out of pure goodness. Cole met her gaze steadily. I'm not most men, and I've got my own reasons for being out here alone, reasons that don't involve taking advantage of injured women. You need help. I can provide it. That's all there is to it. She studied his face for a long moment, then seemed to relax slightly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound ungrateful. It's just, you don't know me from Adam, Cole finished. I understand. Trust has to be earned, and you've got no reason to trust anyone right now. You saved my life, Lydia said quietly. That's something. That's everything, Cole corrected. Now you need to eat. When's the last time you had food in your belly? Lydia's face went pale. The morning of the raid, we had breakfast, eggs and biscuits. Samuel made them. He was a terrible cook, but... Her voice caught. I told him they were the best biscuits I'd ever had. I lied to make him smile. Cole swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. I've got salt pork and beans. It's not much, but it'll give you strength. He left the tent and set about preparing a simple meal over the fire. As he worked, he found himself thinking about Lydia's question. Why was he helping her? The simple answer was that it was the right thing to do. But there was more to it than that. He'd been alone for so long, moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to form connections. The loneliness had become a familiar companion, almost comfortable in its constancy. But finding Lydia, fighting to keep her alive, talking to her through the fever, it had awakened something in him he'd thought long dead. Purpose. Connection. The sense that his actions mattered to someone other than himself. Cole brought the food to the tent and helped Lydia sit up, propping her against his saddle. She ate slowly, wincing with each movement, but she finished most of what he gave her. It was a good sign. "Tell me about your homestead," Cole said as she ate. "How long had you been there?" Lydia swallowed a mouthful of beans before answering. 2 years. Samuel and I came from Pennsylvania after our parents died. They'd left us a small inheritance, enough to buy the land and supplies to get started. Samuel had dreams of building a ranch, running cattle. He said Texas was where futures were made. He wasn't wrong, Cole said, for those who survive it. We were doing well, Lydia continued, staring into the distance. We'd built the house ourselves, put up the barn. We had 20 head of cattle, some chickens, a vegetable garden. It wasn't much compared to the big ranches, but it was ours. We built it with our own hands. She turned to look at Cole, her eyes fierce despite the pain. "I want to go back." Cole blinked in surprise. "To the homestead?" "Yes. I need to see it again. I need to—" She paused, struggling with the words. "I need to bury Samuel. I can't leave him there like that. And I need to find that metal box. If the deed is in there, if there's anything left that was his, I need to have it." "You're in no condition to travel," Cole said gently. "Your leg?" "I don't care about my leg," Lydia said sharply. "My brother is lying unburied in the dirt. Every day I wait is another day he's—" She couldn't finish, pressing her hand over her mouth to hold back a sob. Cole was quiet for a moment, weighing the risks. The journey would be hard on her, possibly set back her healing, but he also understood the need. He'd felt it himself when his brother died, the desperate need to do something, anything, to honor the dead. "All right," he said finally, "but we wait 3 more days. Give your body time to start healing. Then we'll go, slow and careful. Deal?" Lydia nodded, relief and grief mixing on her face. "Deal, thank you." The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. Cole tended Lydia's wounds twice daily, helped her eat, and kept watch over her as she slept. He fashioned crutches from sturdy branches, knowing she'd need them. He also rode out to hunt, bringing back rabbit and sage hen to vary their diet and build up her strength. Lydia slept much of the first day, her body still recovering from the fever. But by the second day, she was more alert, asking questions about Cole's life, about the frontier, about anything that might distract her from the grief that threatened to overwhelm her. Cole found himself talking more than he had in years, sharing stories of his time as a cowboy, his work on various ranches, the characters he'd met along the trail. He told her about the war, though he skipped the worst parts. Some memories weren't meant for sharing. In turn, Lydia told him about Pennsylvania, about growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. She spoke of her parents with warmth and sadness, of how her father had been a teacher and her mother a seamstress. She painted pictures with her words, the smell of her mother's apple pie, the sound of her father's laughter, the way Samuel would whistle off-key while doing chores. "He was terrible at whistling," Lydia said with a sad smile. "Never could carry a tune. But he did it anyway, happy as a lark. Used to drive me crazy, but now—" She trailed off, tears welling in her eyes. "Tell me more about him," Cole encouraged. "What was he like?" And Lydia did. She talked for hours, crying and laughing in equal measure, keeping her brother's memory alive through stories. Cole listened, understanding that this was part of her healing, not from the physical wounds, but from the deeper ones that no medicine could touch. On the evening of the 3rd day, Cole helped Lydia outside for the first time. Using the crutches he'd made and leaning heavily on his arm, she hobbled to a spot near the fire where he'd set up a comfortable seat of blankets and saddles. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red. Lydia stared at the colors with an expression Cole couldn't quite read. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "How can the world be so beautiful when it's so cruel?" "I've asked myself that question 100 times, Cole admitted. Never found a good answer. Lydia was quiet for a moment, then spoke again. "Cole, can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer." "Why are you out here alone? A man like you, capable, kind, strong. You could have a wife, a family, a real home. Why are you drifting?" Cole stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. "After the war, I tried to go back to a normal life. Worked on a ranch in Kansas for a while, Even courted a woman there. Sweet girl named Mary. We were talking about getting married. What happened? I had nightmares, Cole said quietly. Bad ones. I'd wake up screaming, sometimes violent. One night I nearly strangled her, thinking she was an enemy soldier. She called off the engagement the next day, and I couldn't blame her. I was damaged goods, and I knew it. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks flying into the darkening sky. So I left, started drifting from place to place, never staying long enough to form connections. Figured I'd save everyone the trouble of dealing with my demons. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, Lydia said softly. Cole shrugged. It's just how things are. I made my peace with it. Did you? Lydia asked, her dark eyes searching his face. Because you don't seem at peace to me. You seem like a man running from something. Her words struck closer to home than Cole cared to admit. Maybe I am, he said gruffly, but I'm here now, and that's what matters. Lydia reached out and touched his hand. Thank you for running in my direction when you did. Cole felt something shift in his chest at her touch, something warm and unfamiliar. He cleared his throat awkwardly. We should get you back to the tent. Sun's going down and it gets cold fast out here. That night, as Lydia slept in the tent, and Cole kept watch by the fire, he found himself thinking about what she'd said. He'd told himself for years that he was better off alone, that his past made him unfit for normal human connection. But these past few days with Lydia had made him question that belief. He'd found purpose in caring for her, satisfaction in seeing her grow stronger each day. Their conversations had reminded him what it was like to truly connect with another person, to share stories and vulnerabilities and hopes. Was he running? Maybe. But for the first time in years, he was starting to wonder what might happen if he stopped. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Cole woke Lydia before sunrise and helped her eat a substantial breakfast. We've got a hard day ahead, he told her. 5 miles doesn't sound like much, but on that leg, it's going to feel like 50. I can do it, Lydia said with determination, though her face was already tight with pain from the effort of sitting up. Cole had prepared the travois again, lining it with every soft thing he had to make the journey as comfortable as possible. He'd also fashioned a kind of awning to provide shade, using a piece of canvas stretched over a wooden frame. Your chariot awaits, he said with a slight smile, trying to lighten the mood. But Lydia didn't smile back. Her face was set in grim lines, her eyes focused on something only she could see. Cole understood. She was steeling herself for what lay ahead. The homestead, the bodies, the ruins of everything she'd built with her brother. They set out as the sun was cresting the horizon, Jonah moving slowly and carefully through the rough terrain. Cole walked beside the travois, one hand resting on Lydia's shoulder, both to steady her and to offer comfort. The journey took over 3 hours, with frequent stops to let Lydia rest and to check that the jolting hadn't done damage to her leg. She was silent for most of the trip, her jaw clenched against the pain, her hands gripping the edges of the travois until her knuckles turned white. As they drew closer to the homestead, the smell of burned wood grew stronger. Lydia's breathing became faster, more shallow. Cole saw her hands start to shake. We can turn back, he offered quietly. Come back another day. No, Lydia said firmly. I need to do this. They crested the final rise, and the homestead spread before them. In the 4 days since the raid, nothing had changed. The ruins still smoldered in places, the bodies still lay where they'd fallen. Carrion birds had been at work, and Cole was grateful for the distance that kept the worst details from being too clear. Lydia made a sound, a low, keening wail that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Cole stopped Jonah immediately and went to her side. I can't, she gasped, her whole body shaking. I can't. I thought I could, but I can't. Yes, you can, Cole said firmly, taking her hands in his. Look at me, Lydia. Look at me. She dragged her eyes from the ruins to his face, tears streaming down her cheeks. You are strong enough for this, Cole told her. You survived the raid. You survived the fever. You can survive this, and I'm right here with you. You're not alone. Lydia took a shuddering breath, then another. Slowly, her shaking subsided. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Cole gave her a few more minutes to compose herself, then began the careful descent toward the homestead. He avoided going near the bodies, instead heading straight for where the house had stood. If the cellar had survived, it would be there. He helped Lydia from the travois, supporting most of her weight as she balanced on her good leg. Together, moving inches at a time, they approached the ruins. The house's stone foundation was still intact, and after some searching, Cole found the cellar entrance. The wooden door had burned away, but the stone steps leading down were undamaged. "Wait here," Cole said, settling Lydia against a partially standing wall. "Let me check it first." He descended carefully, testing each step. The cellar was dark and full of smoke smell, but it had indeed survived the fire. Cole pulled out his flint and struck a light, illuminating the small space. Shelves lined the walls, most of their contents destroyed or damaged. But in the back corner, wrapped in oilcloth just as Lydia had described, sat a metal box about the size of a large book. Cole grabbed it and climbed back up into the light. "Got it," he said, holding it up. Lydia's face transformed, hope lighting her features for the first time since he'd found her. "Open it, please." Cole pried open the box. Inside were several papers, a small pouch of coins, and a few personal items: a woman's locket, a tintype photograph, some letters tied with ribbon. "The deed," Lydia breathed as Cole pulled out an official-looking document. "Samuel was right. It survived." She took the paper with shaking hands, staring at it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "This was ours," she said softly. "Proof that we were here, that we built something, that Samuel's dreams meant something." Cole carefully placed everything back in the box. "We should find Samuel now, so you can say goodbye properly." Lydia nodded, her face grave. "He was in the yard, defending the house. I saw him go down before they set fire to the barn." Together, with Cole supporting Lydia, they made their way around the ruins. The bodies were worse up close than they'd been from a distance, and Cole tried to position himself to block Lydia's view of the worst. They found Samuel near the front of what had been the house. He'd fallen with a rifle still in his hands, fighting to the last. He'd been a young man, probably handsome before death had claimed him. Now he just looked small and broken. Lydia collapsed to her knees beside her brother's body, a sob tearing from her throat. Cole stood back, giving her privacy and her grief, but staying close enough to help if she needed it. "I'm sorry, Samuel," Lydia wept, touching her brother's hand. "I'm so sorry. You told me to hide, and I did. I hid like a coward while you fought. You saved me, and I couldn't save you." Cole's own eyes stung with tears. He'd been to too many funerals, seen too much death, but somehow this hit harder than most. Maybe because he'd spent days with Lydia, heard her stories about her brother, seen the love between them even in memory. After a while, Lydia looked up at Cole. "Help me bury him, please." They spent the rest of the day digging graves, one for Samuel and one for the other casualties of the raid. It was hard work, made harder by the rocky ground and Lydia's insistence on helping despite her injuries. Cole finally convinced her to sit and direct him, which she did through tears that never seemed to stop flowing. As the sun began to set, they stood before Samuel's grave. Cole had fashioned a simple cross from 2 pieces of wood salvaged from the ruins. Lydia stood on her crutches, swaying slightly, but refusing to sit. "Do you want to say anything?" Cole asked gently. Lydia was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fresh earth. When she finally spoke, her voice was stronger than Cole expected. "Samuel Warren, beloved brother, faithful friend, hopeful dreamer. You were only 19, but you lived with more courage than most men twice your age. You protected me until your last breath. You gave me a chance at life." She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I promise I won't waste it. I promise I'll make something of this life you saved. I'll make you proud, Samuel. I swear it." Cole removed his hat and added his own words. "Lord, if you're listening, take care of this young man. He died protecting what he loved, and that's about the most honorable death there is. Give him peace, and give his sister the strength to carry on. Amen." "Amen," Lydia echoed softly. As darkness fell, Cole helped Lydia back to the travois. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and within minutes of settling onto the cushioned surface, she was asleep. Cole took one last look at the homestead ruins before beginning the journey back to his camp. The metal box sat securely in his saddlebag, containing the proof that Lydia Warren owned 160 acres of Texas land. It was valuable, potentially very valuable. But as Cole looked at the sleeping woman on the travois, he knew the real value wasn't in the land or the deed. It was in the fact that she'd faced the worst day of her life and survived it. She'd buried her brother, said goodbye to her dreams, and yet she'd made a promise to live. The journey back to camp was slower, with Cole frequently checking to make sure Lydia hadn't been jarred awake. The moon rose full and bright, lighting their path through the darkness. When they finally reached the canyon, Cole carefully lifted Lydia and carried her to the tent. She stirred as he laid her down, her eyes opening briefly. "Thank you," she murmured. "For everything." "Sleep," Cole said softly. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." But as Cole sat by the fire that night, he realized he had no idea what came next. Lydia had a claim to land she couldn't work alone. She had no family left, no money beyond the small amount in that metal box, and injuries that would take months to fully heal. The smart thing would be to take her to Riverton, help her sell the land claim, and send her back east where she could start fresh somewhere safe. That's what a practical man would do. But Cole Merrick had stopped being a practical man the moment he'd heard that faint breath beneath the burning barn timbers. He'd made a promise. You're still breathing, that's enough. And he intended to honor it, no matter where it led. The morning after they returned from the homestead, Cole woke to find Lydia already awake and sitting outside the tent, staring at the metal box that sat beside her like a silent companion. The dawn light caught the tears on her cheeks, turning them to silver. "Couldn't sleep?" Cole asked, settling down beside her with 2 cups of coffee he'd just brewed. Lydia accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around it for warmth. "I keep thinking about what Samuel said the night before the raid. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, and he told me he'd finally figured out what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to build the ranch into something that would last, something we could pass down to our children someday." She laughed bitterly. "Children. We were both so young, so stupid. We thought we had all the time in the world." Cole sipped his coffee, letting her talk. He'd learned over the past week that sometimes the best thing he could do was simply listen. "I opened the box last night," Lydia continued. "After you fell asleep. There's $43 in there. That's everything we had left after buying supplies last month. $43 and a piece of paper saying, 'I own land I can't work.'" She turned to look at Cole, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "What am I supposed to do now, Cole? Tell me, because I honestly don't know." Cole set down his cup and thought carefully before speaking. "You've got choices. Not easy ones, but you've got them. You could sell the land claim. With 160 acres, you'd get a fair price, maybe enough to book passage back east and start fresh somewhere safe. And do what? Go back to Pennsylvania and become a seamstress like my mother? Live in some boarding house and sew other people's clothes until I'm old and gray?" Lydia shook her head. "Samuel and I left Pennsylvania because we wanted more than that. We wanted land of our own, a life we built with our own hands. If I go back now, everything he died for means nothing." "Then you could stay in Texas," Cole said. "Riverton's a growing town. They're always looking for teachers, shopkeepers, workers of all kinds. You're educated, capable. You could make a life there." "A life," Lydia repeated flatly. "Working for someone else, living in someone else's building, having nothing that's truly mine. That's not a life, Cole. That's just existing." Cole met her fierce gaze. "Then there's a third option, though it's the hardest one." "What's that?" "You work the land. You build that ranch Samuel dreamed of." Lydia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "In case you haven't noticed, I can barely walk. How exactly am I supposed to work a ranch? And even if I could, I don't know the first thing about ranching. Samuel was the one who knew about cattle and horses and all of it. I just helped where I could." "You'd learn," Cole said simply. "Same as everyone else out here learned. Trial and error, asking questions, making mistakes, and figuring out how to fix them." "Alonely?" Lydia's voice cracked on the word. "I'd be doing it alone, Cole. And I'm not strong enough for that. I'm barely strong enough to get through each day without falling apart." Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the canyon walls that glowed pink in the rising sun. What he was about to say would change everything, and he knew it. But looking at Lydia, at her grief and her determination, At the way she refused to break even when everything had been taken from her. He knew he had to say it anyway. "You wouldn't have to do it alone," he said finally. Lydia turned to stare at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I have a proposition for you. It's unconventional as hell, and you'll probably think I've lost my mind, but hear me out." Cole took a breath. "I own land too, 320 acres about 15 miles north of your homestead. I bought it 2 years ago with money I'd saved from working cattle drives. Been planning to start my own ranch someday, but never seemed to find the right time to actually do it." "I don't understand what you're suggesting," Lydia said, though her eyes had sharpened with interest. "Combine the land," Cole said. "Your 160 and my 320 makes 480 acres. That's enough to run a decent-sized herd, enough to make a real go of it. We'd be partners, equal owners, equal say in how things are run. We build the ranch together, split the profits down the middle." Lydia stared at him as if he'd started speaking in tongues. "You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious." "But why? Why would you offer that? You don't even know me, Cole. I've been nothing but a burden to you, and now you want to tie yourself to me in a business partnership?" She shook her head in disbelief. "What's in it for you?" "A partner," Cole said honestly. "Someone to build something with. I've been drifting for years, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Maybe I'm tired of drifting. Maybe I'm ready to build something that lasts." He paused. "And maybe I think you deserve a chance to fulfill your brother's dream, even if he's not here to see it." Lydia's eyes filled with fresh tears. "That's the kindest thing anyone's ever offered me. But Cole, it's crazy. We barely know each other. What if we can't work together? What if I'm terrible at ranching? What if it works?" Cole interrupted. "What if we build something good, something worth having?" "People would talk," Lydia said quietly. "A man and woman, unmarried, working a ranch together. They'd assume things." "Let them assume," Cole said with a shrug. "We'd know the truth. That's all that matters." Lydia looked down at the metal box, running her fingers over its scarred surface. "Can I think about it? This is too big a decision to make when I'm exhausted and grieving and barely able to think straight." "Take all the time you need," Cole said. "The offer stands whenever you're ready to give me an answer." They fell into silence, drinking their coffee and watching the sun climb higher. Cole knew he'd surprised himself as much as he'd surprised Lydia with his offer. It went against everything he'd told himself about staying detached, about not forming connections that could hurt when they inevitably fell apart. But something had changed in him over the past week. Caring for Lydia, hearing her stories, seeing her strength in the face of devastating loss, it had awakened something he'd thought dead. Hope, maybe. Or purpose. Or maybe just the simple human need to matter to someone, to build something meaningful. Over the next few days, Lydia's physical healing continued. She grew stronger, able to move around the camp with her crutches, even helping with simple tasks like preparing food or mending clothes. Cole fashioned a more comfortable seat for her near the fire, using rocks and blankets to create a place where she could sit without putting pressure on her broken leg. They fell into an easy routine of working together. Cole would hunt or gather supplies, and Lydia would prepare meals and keep the camp organized. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire and talk about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, debating the merits of various cattle breeds, or simply enjoying comfortable silence. Cole found himself looking forward to these evening conversations more than he cared to admit. Lydia was sharp and funny, with a dry wit that caught him off guard and made him laugh more than he had in years. She was also remarkably well-read, able to quote poetry and discuss books Cole had never even heard of. "My father was a teacher," she explained one evening when Cole commented on her education. "He believed girls should be educated just as thoroughly as boys. Caused quite a scandal in our town when he insisted I attend the high school instead of just the finishing school." "Your father sounds like a smart man," Cole said. "He was. Stubborn as a mule, but smart." Lydia smiled at the memory. He and Samuel were so alike, both dreamers, both convinced they could change the world if they just worked hard enough. My mother used to say they had their heads in the clouds and their feet off the ground. "What about you?" Cole asked. "Are you a dreamer too?" Lydia considered the question. "I used to think I was practical, the sensible one who kept Samuel's feet on the ground. But looking back, I think I was just as much a dreamer. I just hit it better. She looked at Cole across the firelight. What about you? Do you dream, Cole Merrick? Cole poked at the fire with a stick. Used to, not so much anymore. That's sad, Lydia said softly. Everyone should have dreams. Dreams are dangerous, Cole said. They give you something to lose. So does breathing, Lydia countered. But you do it anyway. Her words echoed the promise he'd made to her in the ruins. You're still breathing. That's enough. Cole found himself smiling despite himself. You've got an answer for everything, don't you? My father also taught me to argue, Lydia said with a grin. Said it would serve me well in life, though I'm not sure this is what he had in mind. 3 days after Cole's proposition, Lydia brought it up again. They were sitting by the fire after supper, the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Cole was cleaning his rifle, and Lydia was attempting to knit a sock with yarn and needles he'd picked up on a quick trip to a trading post. I've been thinking about your offer, she said without preamble. Cole's hand stilled on the rifle. And? I want to see your land first. Before I make a decision, I need to see what we'd be working with. That's fair, Cole said. But you're in no condition to travel that far yet. Your leg needs at least another few weeks to heal before we risk it. Then tell me about it, Lydia said, setting down her knitting. Describe it to me. Make me see it. Cole set aside the rifle and leaned back, thinking. It's good land. Better than your homestead, if I'm being honest. It's got a creek running through the southern portion. Never goes dry, even in the worst droughts. Natural grazing areas with decent grass and enough timber to build whatever structures we'd need. There's a small valley that would be perfect for a house, sheltered from the worst winds, but with a view that goes on for miles. Why haven't you built there already? Lydia asked. Because I kept telling myself I'd do it next year, Cole admitted. Next year when I had more money saved. Next year when I knew exactly what I wanted to build. Next year when I was ready. He laughed without humor. Truth is, I was never going to be ready. I was too comfortable being alone, too afraid of what might happen if I actually tried to build something permanent. What changed? Cole looked at her across the fire, her face half in shadow, half illuminated by the dancing flames. I found you, and I realized that being alone wasn't comfortable at all. It was just familiar. Lydia held his gaze for a long moment. I'm scared, Cole. Scared of failing, scared of not being good enough, scared of losing something else I care about. But I'm more scared of going back east and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd been brave enough to try. So that's a yes? That's a yes, Lydia said, her voice stronger now. We'll be partners. We'll combine our land and build a ranch. I don't know the first thing about what I'm doing, and I'll probably make 100 mistakes, but I want to try. Cole felt something warm bloom in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to happiness. Then we're partners, he said, extending his hand across the fire. Lydia reached out and clasped his hand firmly. Her grip was strong despite everything she'd been through, her palm calloused from work. Partners, she agreed. Equal owners, equal say. Equal owners, equal say, Cole confirmed. They shook on it, and in that moment, both of their lives shifted onto a new path. Neither of them could have predicted where that path would lead, but for the first time since the raid, both felt something that had been missing, hope. The conversation turned practical after that. They spent hours discussing what needed to be done, creating lists and making plans. They'd need to build a house first, something sturdy that could withstand Texas weather. Then a barn for livestock and equipment. They'd need to buy cattle, hire hands for the big jobs, set up supply lines with nearby towns. How much money do you have saved? Lydia asked. About $300, Cole said. Not a fortune, but enough to get started if we're careful. Combined with my 43, that's $343, plus whatever we can get from selling timber from the land or any other resources. Lydia was thinking out loud, her mind clearly working through the mathematics. We could start with a small herd, maybe 30 head, build up from there as we prove we can handle it. You've got a head for business, Cole observed. My father insisted I learn mathematics, Lydia said women needed to understand money just as much as men did, maybe more since they were often left to manage households alone. Your father was a wise man. He was, Lydia agreed softly. I wish he could have seen this. seen me trying to build something of my own. He would have been proud. She paused. Samuel would have been proud too. This is exactly what he wanted, to build something that would last, something meaningful. We'll build it for him, Cole said. We'll make sure his dream becomes real. Lydia smiled, and it was the first real smile Cole had seen from her since he'd found her in the ruins. It transformed her face, making her look younger and lighter, as if some of the grief's weight had lifted. As the days passed and Lydia continued to heal, their partnership began to take on a more defined shape. Cole made a trip to Riverton to register their business partnership officially and to buy supplies they'd need. He also hired a lawyer to draw up proper papers, ensuring that both he and Lydia had equal claims to all property and assets. When he returned to camp 3 days later, he found Lydia up and moving with much more confidence. She'd graduated from crutches to a sturdy walking stick, and though she still favored her injured leg heavily, she could get around much better. "You look stronger," Cole observed, dismounting from Jonah. "I feel stronger," Lydia said, "both body and spirit. Having a purpose helps. Having something to work toward." She gestured to a pile of papers she'd been organizing. "I've been making more detailed plans. I figure if we're really doing this, we should do it right." Cole looked through her notes and was impressed. She'd created lists of necessary supplies, drawn rough sketches of possible building layouts, and even calculated estimated costs for various scenarios. She'd thought of things he'd never considered, like where to place the henhouse for optimal egg production and how to design the barn to make mucking stalls easier. "You've been busy," he said. "I had to do something besides sit here feeling sorry for myself," Lydia said. "Besides, planning helps me feel like I have some control over what happens next. After everything that's been taken from me, I need that." Cole understood completely. After the war, after losing his family and his farm, the only thing that had kept him going was the feeling that he was in control of his own destiny, even if that destiny was just drifting from place to place. That evening, as they sat by the fire reviewing Lydia's plans, she suddenly looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why did you really make this offer? And don't give me that line about wanting a partner or being tired of drifting. I want the real reason." Cole was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words. "When I found you in those ruins, you were the first person I'd allowed myself to care about in years. I told myself it was just humanitarian. Anyone would have helped. But the truth is, caring for you, watching you fight to survive, seeing your strength, it woke something up in me that I'd tried to bury." "What did it wake up?" "The belief that life could be more than just getting through each day," Cole said quietly. "The belief that building something with someone else might actually be worth the risk of getting hurt again. You asked if I have dreams, and I said no. But that was a lie. I do have a dream, Lydia. I dream of having a home, a real home, not just a place to sleep. I dream of building something that matters, something that will still be standing long after I'm gone. And when I look at you, I see someone who shares that dream, someone who understands what it costs but is willing to pay the price anyway." Lydia's eyes had filled with tears during his speech. "That's the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me." "You deserve honesty," Cole said. "This partnership, if it's going to work, it has to be built on honesty. No pretenses, no hidden motives, just two people trying to build something good out of the ashes of what they've lost." "I can do honest," Lydia said, wiping her eyes. "So here's my honesty. I'm terrified. I'm terrified of failing, of disappointing you, of not being strong enough for what's ahead. But I'm also excited in a way I haven't been since before the raid. You've given me something to live for, Cole, a reason to keep breathing, and I'm grateful for that." "You don't need to be grateful," Cole said. "We're helping each other. That's what partners do." 2 weeks later, Lydia's leg had healed enough for them to make the journey to Cole's land. They traveled slowly, taking frequent breaks, and made camp at midday when the heat grew too intense. Cole was constantly watchful, his rifle always within reach. The raiders who'd attacked Lydia's homestead were still out there somewhere, and he had no intention of letting them strike again. On the afternoon of the second day, they crested a rise and Cole pointed to a valley spread out below them. "There it is. That's our land." Lydia leaned forward in the saddle, shading her eyes against the sun. Cole heard her breath catch as she took in the view. The valley was beautiful, green grass dotted with wildflowers, stands of oak and cottonwood trees, and a creek that sparkled silver in the sunlight. In the distance, low hills rolled away toward the horizon, purple with distance and heat haze. "Oh, Cole," Lydia breathed. "It's beautiful." "Wait until you see it up close," Cole said, pride evident in his voice. They descended into the valley, and Cole showed Lydia around his property. He pointed out the best spots for various buildings, the areas with the richest grass, the places where the creek ran deep enough for good fishing. He showed her the stand of timber they could use for construction, the natural shelter of rock formations that would protect cattle during storms. Lydia took it all in, asking questions, making observations, clearly seeing the same potential Cole saw. When they reached the spot Cole had envisioned for the house, a small rise with a view of the entire valley, she stood for a long moment in silence. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked. "I'm thinking about how different my life is now compared to a month ago," Lydia said quietly. "A month ago, I was living in a small house with my brother, trying to make a simple homestead work. My world was small but safe. Now Samuel's gone, I have a broken leg that will probably never heal quite right, and I'm standing in a valley with a man I barely know, planning to build a ranch from nothing." She turned to look at Cole. "And do you know what's strange? Despite everything, despite all the grief and pain and fear, I feel more alive than I have in years." Cole felt his breath catch. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "I'm not sure yet," Lydia admitted, "but I think it might be good. Scary, but good." They spent 3 days camped on the land, with Cole showing Lydia every corner of their property. They walked the boundaries, discussed where to place fences, and debated the merits of longhorns versus shorthorns for their initial herd. Lydia's limp grew less pronounced each day as her leg continued to heal, and her face lost some of the gauntness that grief and pain had carved there. On the third evening, as they sat on the rise where the house would eventually stand, Lydia turned to Cole with a thoughtful expression. "We should visit my land too before we make final plans. Combine both properties in our minds, see how they connect." Cole tensed slightly. "Are you sure? Going back there?" "I need to," Lydia said firmly. "It's part of what I'm bringing to this partnership, and I need to see it with new eyes. Not as the place where I lost everything, but as an asset we'll use to build something new." The next morning they headed south toward Lydia's former homestead. The journey was harder for her than Cole's land had been, and he could see the tension building in her shoulders as they drew closer. Her hands gripped the saddle horn until her knuckles turned white, and her breathing grew shallow. "We can turn back," Cole offered for what must have been the 10th time. "No," Lydia said through clenched teeth. "I need to do this." The graves were the first thing they saw as they crested the final rise, 3 fresh mounds of earth marked with simple wooden crosses. Lydia stared at them for a long moment, tears running silently down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. Cole helped her dismount and supported her as they walked to Samuel's grave. Lydia knelt awkwardly, her injured leg stretched out to the side, and placed her hand flat on the earth. "I'm building the ranch, Samuel," she said softly. "Not alone. I found a partner, a good man named Cole, who saved my life. We're going to combine our lands and create something beautiful, something that will last." She paused, more tears falling. "I miss you every single day, but I'm going to make your dream real, I promise." Cole stood back, giving her privacy, but he felt his own throat tighten with emotion. After several minutes, Lydia stood with his help, and they walked the boundaries of her property. The land was different from Cole's, flatter, with less tree coverage but more open grazing land. The ruins of the homestead were stark reminders of what had been lost, but Lydia examined them with a critical eye rather than an emotional one. "The stone foundation is still good," she observed, "and the well didn't burn. These are assets." "They are," Cole agreed, impressed by her composure. "The soil here is richer than on your land," Lydia continued. "Better for crops if we decide to plant any. And look," she pointed toward the eastern boundary. "There's another creek there, smaller than yours, but it would still provide water for livestock." They spent hours walking the property, with Lydia pointing out features Cole hadn't noticed on his first visit during the raid's aftermath. She showed him where the vegetable garden had been, explaining which crops had grown best. She identified the best grazing areas and the spots where water tended to pool during rains. "You really do know this land," Cole said. "Samuel and I spent 2 years learning every inch of it," Lydia replied. 2 years of mistakes and successes, of figuring out what worked and what didn't. That knowledge isn't lost just because he is. Her voice caught slightly, but she pushed on. "It's part of what I bring to our partnership. Your land and my knowledge of this land. Together, we have something stronger than either of us would have alone." As the sun began to set, they stood together looking out over the combined properties. 480 acres of Texas land, full of possibility and promise. "It's going to take years to build what we're envisioning," Lydia said quietly. "Years of hard work and sacrifice. Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I've spent the last 10 years avoiding exactly that kind of commitment," Cole admitted. "But yes, I'm ready. Question is, are you?" Lydia turned to look at him, and in the fading light, her face was resolute. "A month ago, I was left for dead in the ruins of everything I'd ever known. You found me when you had every reason to just ride past. You saved my life, not just by pulling me from that wreckage, but by giving me a reason to keep living. So yes, Cole Merrick, I'm ready. I'm ready to work until my hands bleed. I'm ready to fail and get back up and try again. I'm ready to build something that will make Samuel's sacrifice mean something." Cole held out his hand. "Then let's go build that ranch." Lydia clasped his hand firmly, her grip strong and sure. "Let's build it." As they rode back toward Cole's land in the gathering darkness, both of them felt the weight of what they'd committed to. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. There would be setbacks and struggles, moments of doubt and despair. But there would also be something neither of them had felt in a long time, a future worth working toward, built on the foundation of shared purpose and unexpected partnership. The stars came out one by one, vast and indifferent above them. But below, two people rode side by side toward a dream they'd build together from the ashes of loss, proving that sometimes the worst moments of our lives plant the seeds for the best ones, if we're brave enough to nurture them. The next morning, they broke camp early and headed for Riverton. The town was 2 days' ride northwest, and Cole wanted to arrive with enough daylight left to conduct business. They needed supplies, lumber, tools, and most importantly, they needed to hire workers to help with the massive undertaking of building a ranch from scratch. Lydia was quieter than usual during the journey, and Cole gave her space to work through whatever thoughts were occupying her mind. He'd learned over the past weeks that she processed things internally before speaking, and that pushing her to talk before she was ready only made her withdraw further. It wasn't until they made camp the first night that she finally broke her silence. They'd finished eating and were sitting by the fire when she suddenly said, "People in town are going to talk about us." Cole looked up from the harness he was mending. "Probably. They'll assume things, make judgments." Lydia's voice was steady, but her hands twisted in her lap. A man and woman working a ranch together, unmarried, living in close quarters. You know what conclusions they'll draw. "Let them draw whatever conclusions they want," Cole said. "We know the truth of what we are. Business partners building something together. That's all that matters." "Does it really not bother you?" Lydia asked, meeting his eyes across the firelight. "The gossip, the speculation, the potential damage to your reputation?" Cole set aside the harness and considered his answer carefully. "My reputation is that of a drifter who's never stayed anywhere long enough to plant roots. If people want to add partnership with a woman to that list, I reckon it won't change much. Besides, I've never put much stock in what others think of me. Learned a long time ago that you can't control what people say, only how you respond to it." "I wish I had your confidence," Lydia said softly. "Where I come from, reputation was everything. A woman's good name was all she had. The idea of deliberately courting scandal." She shook her head. "This isn't Pennsylvania," Cole reminded her gently. "This is Texas. Out here, what matters is whether you can do the work and keep your word. Everything else is just noise." "I hope you're right." Lydia pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the cooling night air. "But I need to be prepared for people to treat me differently, to question my character, my choices. Some might refuse to do business with us because of the arrangement. Then we'll find people who will," Cole said firmly. Lydia, if you're having second thoughts about this partnership because of what people might say, no, she interrupted quickly. That's not what I'm saying. I'm committed to this. I just want us both to go into it with our eyes open about the challenges we'll face, and not all of them will be about cattle and construction. Cole nodded slowly. Fair enough. So we face those challenges the same way we'll face the others, together, as partners. Anyone who has a problem with our arrangement can take it up with both of us. A small smile touched Lydia's lips. You're protective. I didn't expect that. You're my partner, Cole said simply. Looking out for each other is part of the deal. Something shifted in Lydia's expression, a softening, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Thank you, Cole, for understanding, for not making me feel foolish for worrying about these things. Nothing foolish about it, Cole assured her. You're right to think about potential obstacles. Being prepared means we won't be caught off guard. They fell into comfortable silence after that, and when they finally bedded down for the night, Cole found himself thinking about Lydia's concerns. She was right that people would talk. That was inevitable. What surprised him was how little he cared about that compared to how much he cared about protecting her from the worst of it. Somewhere along the way, this partnership had become more than just a business arrangement to him. Lydia had become someone he genuinely cared about, someone whose happiness mattered to him in a way that went beyond profit margins and property lines. It was a realization that should have worried him. Caring for people made you vulnerable, gave you something to lose. But instead of fear, Cole felt something closer to contentment. They reached Riverton late the following afternoon. The town had grown since Cole's last visit 6 months prior. New buildings lined the main street, and the population seemed to have doubled. Progress was coming to this part of Texas, bringing both opportunity and complication. Cole helped Lydia dismount in front of the boarding house, a 2-story structure with a fresh coat of white paint and lace curtains in the windows. She still favored her injured leg, but her mobility had improved dramatically. I'll get us rooms and then head to the general store, Cole said. You should rest. I'm coming with you, Lydia said firmly. I need to be part of these decisions, Cole. This is my ranch, too. Cole opened his mouth to argue, saw the determination in her eyes, and closed it again. All right, but if you get tired, you tell me. Yes, Mother, Lydia said, with a hint of teasing that made Cole smile despite himself. They secured 2 rooms at the boarding house, separate floors at Lydia's insistence, and then walked to the general store. The proprietor, a portly man named Henderson, greeted Cole with recognition and curiosity when he saw Lydia on his arm. Cole Merrick, been a while. And who might this young lady be? Miss Lydia Warren, Cole said. My business partner. We're starting a ranch operation north of here and need to place a large order. Henderson's eyebrows climbed his forehead, but to his credit, he simply nodded and pulled out his order book. What can I do for you folks? They spent the next 2 hours going through everything they'd need: lumber, nails, tools, hardware, rope, canvas, food supplies, seed, and 100 other items. Lydia surprised Cole and clearly impressed Henderson with her knowledge of what was needed and her firm negotiation on prices. Your partner knows her business, Henderson said to Cole as he tallied up the order. She does, Cole agreed, feeling an unexpected surge of pride. The total came to $237, leaving them just over $100 in reserve. It was tight, but manageable if they were careful. I can have most of this ready for pickup in 3 days, Henderson said. Some items I'll need to order from San Antonio, which will take a couple of weeks. 3 days works, Cole said, pulling out his money. We'll need to hire some men in the meantime anyway. Henderson counted the bills carefully and made a notation in his ledger. You folks might want to check at the Silver Star Saloon. That's where most men looking for work gather. But I'll warn you, some might be hesitant to work for a woman. They won't be working for a woman, Lydia said coolly. They'll be working for a ranch. If they can't handle that, they're not the men we want anyway. Henderson had the grace to look chagrined. Fair point, Miss Warren. Fair point indeed. As they left the store, Cole glanced at Lydia. You handled that well. I told you I could handle myself, she replied, but there was satisfaction in her voice. The Silver Star Saloon was exactly what Cole expected: sawdust on the floor, smoke in the air, and the smell of cheap whiskey and cheaper tobacco. Men clustered around tables playing cards or standing at the bar, and conversation died down noticeably when Lydia walked in beside Cole. Cole ignored the stares and approached the bar. "We're looking to hire workers. Ranch construction and cattle work. Fair wages, hard work. Anyone interested can talk to me or my partner here, Miss Warren." The bartender, a grizzled man with more scars than teeth, jerked his thumb toward a back corner. "You might try those boys over there. Been looking for steady work for a couple weeks now." Cole and Lydia made their way to the indicated table where three men sat nursing beers. They looked up as Cole and Lydia approached, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. "Heard you're looking for work," Cole said without preamble. "Ranch construction to start, then cattle work once we're up and running." The oldest of the three, a weathered man with sun-creased eyes, spoke first. "Heard you say partner. That mean what I think it means?" "Miss Warren and I own the ranch jointly," Cole confirmed. "Equal partners. If that's a problem, we'll move on." The three men exchanged glances. Finally, the weathered one stuck out his hand. "Name's Jack Porter. These are my boys, Tommy and Sam. We've worked ranches from here to Montana, and we don't care who signs our pay as long as the money's good and the work's honest." Cole shook his hand, relieved. "Cole Merrick. This is Lydia Warren. What's your experience?" For the next hour, they discussed work history, skills, and expectations. The Porter brothers proved to be exactly what they needed: experienced, capable, and willing to work hard. They agreed on wages of $30 a month plus food and shelter, and shook on the deal. "We'll need at least 2 more men," Lydia said as they left the saloon. 5 total should be enough to get the main house and barn up. "Agreed. We can ask around tomorrow." Cole noticed Lydia limping more pronounced than earlier. "You're exhausted. We should get back to the boarding house." "I am tired," Lydia admitted, "but it's a good tired. We accomplished a lot today." Over dinner at the boarding house, a surprisingly good meal of roast chicken and vegetables, they reviewed their progress and made plans for the next day. Other diners cast curious glances their way, but no one approached them directly. After dinner, Cole walked Lydia to her room on the 2nd floor. She paused at her door, turning to face him. "Thank you for today. For not treating me like I was helpless or in the way. For letting me be an actual partner." "You are an actual partner," Cole said. "I meant what I said about equal say. Your input today was invaluable." Lydia looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "I haven't said this properly yet, but thank you, Cole. Not just for today, but for everything. For saving my life, for giving me purpose, for believing I could do this when I didn't believe it myself. You've given me more than a business partnership. You've given me hope." Cole felt something tighten in his chest. "You've given me something too, a reason to stop running, a reason to build instead of drift." They stood there for a moment, the hallway silent around them, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. Finally, Lydia reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "Good night, Cole." "Good night, Lydia." Cole lay awake long after returning to his own room, staring at the ceiling and trying to identify the unfamiliar feeling in his chest. It took him longer than it should have to recognize it for what it was. Happiness. Not the fleeting contentment of a good meal or successful day, but something deeper and more lasting. He'd spent so many years convinced that happiness was something other people experienced, that his own capacity for it had been burned away in the war and its aftermath. But Lydia had proven him wrong. She'd awakened something in him he'd thought dead, and the terrifying, wonderful truth was that he was beginning to care for her as more than just a business partner. Cole didn't sleep much that night, his mind full of plans and possibilities, and the memory of Lydia's hand in his. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity. They hired 2 more workers, a young man named Billy, who was eager but inexperienced, and an older carpenter named Frank, who'd built half the structures in Riverton. They finalized supply orders, arranged for wagons to transport everything to the ranch, and met with the local land office to register their partnership officially. Lydia handled herself with increasing confidence, and Cole noticed that people's initial skepticism often turned to respect once they dealt with her directly. She was sharp, fair, and didn't back down when challenged. More than once, Cole found himself simply watching her negotiate or explain plans, impressed by her natural authority. On the third evening, as they prepared to leave town the next morning, Cole and Lydia took a walk through the quieter part of town. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air had cooled to a comfortable temperature. "It's really happening," Lydia said softly. "We're really doing this." "Having second thoughts?" "No, just amazed, I suppose. A month ago I thought my life was over, and now I'm about to build a ranch with a man I barely knew existed." She glanced at him. "How did this happen?" "You refused to quit breathing," Cole said, "and I refused to ride past." Lydia stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "Can I tell you something? Something I haven't had the courage to say before? Always. When I was trapped under that beam, dying in the fire, I begged Samuel's ghost to let me join him. I wanted to die, Cole. I wanted it so badly. And then I heard your voice, and I was angry. Angry that someone was going to save me and force me to keep living." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "But you said something that changed everything. You said, 'You're still breathing. That's enough.' And somehow, in that moment, it was enough. That tiny acknowledgement that survival itself was an achievement, it gave me just enough strength to hold on." Cole's throat felt tight. "I'm glad you held on." "So am I," Lydia said, wiping her eyes. "Because this life we're building, this partnership, this ranch, this future, it's already worth every painful breath I took to get here." She paused, seeming to gather courage. "And I need you to know that you're not just my business partner, Cole. You're my friend, one of the best friends I've ever had." "You're my friend too," Cole said, and meant it with everything he had. "And whatever comes, we'll face it together." Lydia smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking over the horizon. "Together," she agreed. They returned to the boarding house as full darkness fell, and Cole escorted Lydia to her room once more. This time, when they paused at her door, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek quickly, then disappeared into her room before he could react. Cole stood in the hallway for a long moment, his hand unconsciously touching the spot where her lips had been. His heart was pounding, and he felt simultaneously exhilarated and terrified, because what he was feeling for Lydia Warren was dangerous. It went beyond friendship, beyond partnership, into territory he'd sworn never to enter again. He was falling in love with her. The realization should have sent him running. Love meant vulnerability, meant giving someone the power to destroy you. He'd learned that lesson too many times already. But as Cole finally made his way to his own room, he found that he couldn't summon the fear he expected. Instead, all he felt was certainty. Whatever was growing between them, friendship, partnership, or something deeper, it was real and worth protecting. And maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk. The journey back to the ranch took 3 days, with wagons full of supplies slowing their progress considerably. The Porter brothers and their other hired men proved their worth immediately, handling the difficult terrain with skill and keeping spirits up with stories and songs around the campfire each evening. Lydia rode in one of the wagons to spare her leg, but she kept busy organizing supplies and discussing plans with Frank the carpenter. By the time they reached the property, she had detailed sketches drawn up for both the house and barn. "We start with the house," Frank declared, studying Lydia's drawings with approval. "Get you to a proper place to live before winter comes. Then the barn, then outbuildings as needed." "2 separate cabins," Lydia corrected firmly. "Mr. Merrick and I will each have our own living quarters." Frank raised an eyebrow but nodded. "2 cabins it is then, though that'll take longer and cost more in materials." "It's not negotiable," Lydia said, her tone brooking no argument. Cole understood. Separate living quarters would help maintain propriety and give each of them private space. It was sensible, practical, and probably wise. So why did it make him feel slightly disappointed? They broke ground on the first cabin the next morning. Frank laid out the foundation with military precision, while the Porter brothers began felling trees and preparing lumber. Billy, despite his lack of experience, proved enthusiastic and willing to learn. Cole and Lydia worked alongside the men, with Lydia doing what she could despite her injured leg. The work was brutal. Texas summer heat beat down mercilessly, and every muscle Cole possessed ached by day's end. But there was something deeply satisfying about it. The feel of sawdust under his hands, the smell of fresh-cut wood, the visible progress made each day. Lydia worked tirelessly, cooking for the crew, managing supplies, and somehow always being exactly where she was needed. Cole watched her move through the camp with growing admiration. She'd fully stepped into her role as co-owner, earning the respect of their workers through competence rather than demanding it through position. 2 weeks into construction, Jack Porter approached Cole as he was washing up after a long day. "Can I speak plainly with you, boss?" "Always." The men were skeptical at first about working for a woman and all. But Miss Warren, she's proven herself 10 times over. Smart, fair, works as hard as any of us. You've got yourself a hell of a partner there. "I know," Cole said simply. "Do you?" Jack gave him a knowing look. "Because from where I'm standing, you've got more than a business partner. You've got a woman who'd walk through fire for this ranch and for you. Question is, do you see it?" Cole met the older man's gaze. "I see it." "And?" "And it's complicated." Jack snorted. "Love always is, but complicated's better than empty, and you strike me as a man who's been empty for a long time." The word love made Cole's chest tighten. "We're partners, friends, that's all." "If you say so, boss," Jack clapped him on the shoulder. "But take it from a man who's been married 30 years. Sometimes the best partnerships start as friendships and grow into something more. Don't be so afraid of it that you miss what's right in front of you." That night, Cole found himself unable to sleep. He left his tent and walked to the construction site, where the framework of the first cabin stood like bones against the starlit sky. In a few more weeks, it would be complete. Walls, roof, windows, a real home. And shortly after, the second cabin would rise beside it. "Can't sleep either?" Cole turned to find Lydia approaching, wrapped in a shawl against the cool night air. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how far we've come. About how much further we have to go." He paused. "About what happens when we get there." Lydia stood beside him, looking up at the cabin framework. "Are you having doubts?" "No. You?" "No." She was quiet for a moment. "But I'm wondering about the future. We've been so focused on building the ranch that we haven't talked much about what our lives will look like once it's built, what the day-to-day reality of this partnership will be." "What do you want it to look like?" Cole asked. Lydia considered the question carefully. "I want to wake up every morning knowing I'm working towards something meaningful. I want to look at what we've built and feel proud. I want—" She trailed off, seeming uncertain whether to continue. "What?" "I want to not feel lonely anymore," she said softly. "For so long, first after my parents died, then after Samuel, I felt this aching loneliness that nothing could fill. But here, working alongside you, building something together, that loneliness has started to fade. And I want to keep feeling that connection, that sense of partnership and purpose." Cole's heart was pounding. "I want that too." Lydia turned to look at him, her face half shadowed in the starlight. "Do you ever think about the future beyond the ranch? About what else might be possible?" It was the closest either of them had come to acknowledging the undercurrent that ran between them. Something deeper than friendship, more complex than partnership. Cole knew his next words mattered, that they would shape everything that came after. "I think about it," he admitted. "I think about it more than I probably should." "And what do you think when you think about it?" Cole turned to face her fully. "I think about how you make me want things I convinced myself I'd never have. Things like a real home, a future with someone who matters to me, a life that's more than just getting through each day. I think about how you've changed everything for me, Lydia, and that terrifies me." "Why does it terrify you?" "Because caring about someone gives them the power to hurt you, and I've been hurt enough times that I'd learned to just stop caring. But you—" He shook his head. "I can't seem to not care about you, no matter how much safer it would be." Lydia reached out and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. "I'm terrified too, of getting hurt again, of losing someone else I care about. But I'm more terrified of living a safe, empty life where I never risk feeling anything real." They stood there in the darkness, hands joined, the framework of their future rising around them. Neither spoke for a long moment, both processing what had been acknowledged between them. Finally, Lydia squeezed his hand gently. "We don't have to figure everything out tonight. We can take it slow, see where this goes naturally. All I know is that I don't want to lose what we have, whatever we choose to call it." Neither do I, Cole said. Lydia smiled up at him, and in that moment, with stars overhead and dreams taking shape around them, Cole felt something he hadn't felt in over a decade. Hope for a future that included not just survival, but happiness. Not just property, but home. Not just partnership, but love. They walked back to camp hand in hand, neither speaking but both feeling the shift that had occurred between them. Whatever they were becoming to each other, it was real and undeniable, and neither of them wanted to fight it anymore. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of sawdust and sweat. The first cabin rose from its foundation, taking shape with walls and rafters and eventually a solid roof that would keep out the Texas weather. Frank worked with the precision of a master craftsman, while the Porter brothers provided the muscle for the heavier work. Cole and Lydia were everywhere at once, measuring, hammering, problem-solving when issues arose. Lydia's leg had healed enough that she no longer needed the walking stick, though she still limped when tired. She'd taken to wearing men's work pants under her skirts for practicality, which had scandalized Billy until Jack Porter told him to mind his own business and focus on his work. The dynamic between Cole and Lydia had shifted subtly since their midnight conversation. They still worked as partners, still made decisions jointly, but now there was an awareness between them that hadn't existed before. Small touches lingered longer. Glances held meaning. When they sat around the campfire at night reviewing the next day's plans, they somehow always ended up sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. The men noticed but said nothing, though Cole caught Jack Porter smiling knowingly more than once. On a warm September afternoon, Frank hammered the final shingle onto the roof of the first cabin and climbed down his ladder with a satisfied grunt. "She's done," he announced. "Ready for living in." Lydia stood beside Cole, staring at the completed structure with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. It was beautiful, a solid, well-built cabin with 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and glass windows that caught the afternoon sun. It wasn't large or fancy, but it was sturdy and well-made, a real home. "This is yours, Miss Warren," Frank said. "We'll start on Mr. Merrick's cabin tomorrow." "Wait," Lydia said suddenly. She turned to Cole. "Can we talk for a moment, privately?" Cole's heart kicked up a notch at the serious expression on her face. "Of course." They walked away from the construction site, following the creek until they were out of earshot. Lydia turned to face him, her hands twisting together nervously. "I've been thinking about something for a while now, and I need to say it before I lose my courage." "All right," Cole said carefully. "Building 2 separate cabins doesn't make sense anymore. Not practically, and not—" She took a breath. "Not emotionally. Cole, these past weeks working alongside you, getting to know you better, I've realized something. I care about you, deeply, in a way that goes far beyond business partnership or even friendship." Cole's breath caught. "Lydia T., let me finish, please. I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other 2 months. I know there are 100 reasons why this is complicated and difficult and potentially unwise. But I also know that you make me feel alive in a way I haven't felt since before the raid. You make me laugh. You challenge me to be better. You see me as an equal when most men would see me as someone to protect or manage or dismiss. And I hope, you might feel the same way about me." Cole closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cup her face gently. "I do. God help me, I do. I've been falling in love with you since the moment you opened your eyes in my tent and decided to keep fighting. I've tried not to because it scared the hell out of me, but Lydia, I'm done fighting it." "You love me?" Lydia's voice was barely a whisper. "I love you," Cole confirmed, saying the words out loud for the first time in over a decade. "I love your strength, your intelligence, your determination. I love how you refuse to let tragedy break you. I love working beside you and talking with you and just being near you. I love you, Lydia Warren." Tears spilled down Lydia's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Cole Merrick. I think I started falling in love with you when you told me that breathing was enough. When you saw me at my absolute lowest and still believed I could survive. You gave me hope when I had none, and you've given me so much more since then." Cole pulled her close and kissed her, pouring everything he felt into that kiss, all the fear he'd overcome, all the walls he'd torn down, all the love he'd been holding back. Lydia kissed him back with equal intensity, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a moment the entire world narrowed down to just the 2 of them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lydia laughed, a sound of pure joy that Cole had never heard from her before. "So," she said, still in his arms, "about those 2 cabins." "What are you suggesting?" Cole asked, though his heart was already racing with hope. "I'm suggesting that we build one house, a real house, big enough for a family, and I'm suggesting that you marry me, Cole Merrick, because I don't want to spend another day without you, and I'm tired of caring what anyone else thinks about it." Cole pulled back slightly to look at her face, making sure she was serious. "You're proposing to me?" "I am. Is that a problem?" "Not even slightly," Cole said, grinning, "though I had plans to do the proposing myself." "You can still do it properly later," Lydia said, her eyes sparkling. "But right now, I need an answer. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Cole said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They kissed again, and this time when they broke apart, they were both laughing like fools. Cole picked Lydia up and spun her around, ignoring her startled yelp, feeling lighter and happier than he could ever remember being. When they walked back to camp hand in hand, the workers looked up from what they were doing. Jack Porter took one look at their faces and started grinning. "Well, it's about damn time," he said. The other men broke into applause and cheers. Frank shook his head with a smile and said, "So I'm guessing we're not building 2 cabins after all." "One house," Cole confirmed. "Big enough for a family. Can you do it?" "Can I do it?" Frank looked almost offended. "Son, I can build you a house that'll stand for 100 years. When do you want it done?" "Before winter, if possible," Lydia said. "We're getting married, and I'd like to spend our first winter together under our own roof." More cheers erupted from the men. Billy was whooping so enthusiastically that Jack had to tell him to calm down before he hurt himself. That evening, they celebrated with an impromptu party. Jack Porter produced a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving, and they passed it around the fire while the men told stories and shared advice about marriage. Most of it was terrible advice that made everyone laugh, but underlying it all was genuine warmth and happiness for the couple. Cole sat with his arm around Lydia, watching the firelight play across her face, still hardly believing this was real. 2 months ago, he'd been a drifter with no purpose beyond the next job. Now he had land, a business, workers who respected him, and most miraculously of all, he had Lydia. "What are you thinking?" Lydia asked softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "That I'm the luckiest man in Texas," Cole said honestly. "We're both lucky," Lydia corrected. "We found each other when we both needed saving." "You saved me just as much as I saved you," Cole said. "More, maybe. I was just existing before I found you. Going through the motions. You gave me a reason to actually live again." Lydia turned to kiss his cheek. "Then we saved each other, and now we build a life together." The next morning, Frank revised his plans to create a single, larger house. 4 rooms, including a kitchen, living area, and 2 bedrooms for future children. The men threw themselves into the work with renewed energy, eager to see the boss and his lady properly settled. Meanwhile, Cole and Lydia made a trip back to Riverton to arrange for a wedding. They visited the small church and spoke with Reverend Matthews, a kindly man who listened to their story with tears in his eyes. "It's not often I get to marry 2 people who've been through what you have," he said. "To see such joy born from such tragedy. That's the Lord's work right there. I'd be honored to perform the ceremony." They set the date for 6 weeks out, giving time for the house to be completed and for word to spread to anyone who might want to attend. Lydia bought fabric to make a simple wedding dress, and Cole purchased a new suit that made him feel like someone playing dress-up, but Lydia insisted he looked handsome. "You clean up well, Mr. Merrick," she teased, adjusting his collar in the tailor's shop. "And you're going to be the most beautiful bride Texas has ever seen, Miss Warren," Cole replied, earning a blush. As they prepared to leave town, they ran into Henderson from the general store. He tipped his hat to them with a knowing smile. "Heard the news. Congratulations to you both. I had a feeling when you came in together that first time that there was more than business between you." "Thank you," Lydia said warmly. "We're very happy." "Good. This territory needs more stories like yours, people who survive hardship and build something beautiful from it. You give folks hope." Henderson paused. "My wife wanted me to tell you that if you need help with wedding preparations, she'd be glad to assist. Not everyone in this town is going to gossip mean-spiritedly about you two. Most folks can recognize real love when they see it. The kindness in his words made Lydia's eyes mist. Thank you. That means more than you know. On the ride back to the ranch, Lydia was quieter than usual. Cole finally asked what she was thinking about. I was thinking about Samuel, she said softly. How much I wish he could be here for this. He would have liked you, Cole. He would have approved. I wish I could have met him, Cole said honestly. He sounds like he was a good man. He was. And he'd be happy knowing that his dream didn't die with him, that the ranch we're building honors what he wanted to create. She looked at Cole. When we have children, if we have a son, I'd like to name him Samuel. Cole felt his throat tighten with emotion. I'd be honored. And if we have a daughter? Lydia smiled. I always liked the name Hope. It seems appropriate, don't you think? Hope Merrick, Cole tested the name. I like it. Though the children will probably come as a surprise to our workers who think we're still building separate cabins. They already know, Cole. Jack told me yesterday that the men have been laying bets on how long it would take us to figure out we were in love. Apparently Tommy won because he bet it would happen before the first cabin was finished. Cole laughed, shaking his head. We weren't as subtle as we thought, were we? Not even a little bit, Lydia agreed, grinning. But I don't care. Let them talk. Let everyone talk. I'm done hiding how I feel about you. She urged her horse closer and reached across the space between them to take his hand. They rode the rest of the way like that, hands clasped, building a future together one moment at a time. The house rose from the ground with remarkable speed. Frank had recruited 2 additional workers from Riverton, and with 7 men working sunrise to sunset, the structure took shape quickly. The foundation was laid, walls erected, and the roof framed within 3 weeks. Cole and Lydia worked alongside the men whenever possible, though Cole increasingly insisted that Lydia rest more, especially as the physical demands of the work grew heavier. She protested at first, but eventually admitted that her legs still ached after long days and that perhaps she should focus her energy on other aspects of ranch preparation. She threw herself into that work with characteristic determination. She planned a garden for the spring, organized their supplies, began creating detailed record books for tracking expenses and income, and started researching cattle breeds and local markets. She also began sewing her wedding dress, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored fabric that would be practical enough to wear again for special occasions. One afternoon, about 4 weeks before the wedding, a wagon rolled up to the construction site. Cole looked up from the beam he was helping position and was surprised to see Henderson from the general store climbing down. Mr. Henderson, Cole greeted him. What brings you out here? Delivery, Henderson said, gesturing to the wagon bed. My wife heard about the wedding, and, well, she started talking to other ladies in town, and before I knew it, half of Riverton was contributing something. Lydia emerged from the partially completed house, wiping her hands on her apron. Contributing what? Henderson pulled back the canvas covering the wagon bed to reveal furniture. A small table with chairs, a rocking chair, a chest of drawers, linens, dishes, and even a beautiful handmade quilt. The ladies of Riverton wanted you to have a proper start in your new home, Henderson explained. Mrs. Patterson made the quilt. The Johnsons contributed the table. The furniture is from various families. Everyone wanted to help. Lydia pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. This is too much. We can't accept. You can and you will, Henderson said firmly but kindly. You're part of this community now, Miss Warren, and communities take care of their own. Besides, my wife said your story inspired her, a young woman refusing to let tragedy defeat her, building a new life from the ashes. She said if that isn't worth celebrating, nothing is. Tears streamed down Lydia's face as she walked to the wagon and ran her hand over the quilt, examining the intricate stitching. Please thank everyone for us. This means more than you know. After Henderson left, Lydia sat in the rocking chair that had been part of the donation and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of being part of something larger than herself. Cole knelt beside her, holding her hand. You've got a whole community behind you, he said softly. Behind us. I never expected this, Lydia said through her tears. After the raid, I felt so alone, like I was the last person left in the world who cared about what happened to me. But look at this, Cole. Look at how many people care. How many people want us to succeed. That's because you inspire people, Cole said. You inspire me every single day." The house was completed 2 weeks before the wedding. Frank supervised the final touches, while the men built furniture to supplement what had been donated. They created a bed frame, shelves, and a large dining table that could seat 10 people comfortably. On the day the house was officially finished, Frank gathered everyone together for a small ceremony. He handed Cole a key he'd forged specially for the front door. "This is yours now," Frank said. "Yours and Miss Warren's. May it stand strong through whatever storms come, and may it always be filled with love and laughter." Cole took the key with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Frank. Thank you all. You've built more than just a house here. You've built our future." That night, Cole and Lydia stood in their new home, their real home, looking around at the empty rooms that would soon be filled with furniture and life and memories. The floors gleamed in the lamplight, the fireplace drew perfectly, and everything smelled of fresh wood and new beginnings. "What do you think?" Cole asked. "I think it's perfect," Lydia said, her voice thick with emotion. "I think Samuel would be proud. I think my parents would be proud. And I think I'm the happiest I've been in my entire life." Cole pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "2 more weeks and you'll be my wife." "2 more weeks and you'll be stuck with me forever," Lydia corrected with a smile. "That's all I want," Cole said honestly. "Forever with you." The wedding day arrived bright and clear, with autumn colors painting the landscape in gold and red. Cole stood at the front of the small church in Riverton, feeling more nervous than he'd ever been in his life. Jack Porter stood beside him, as best man, occasionally muttering encouragement. "Breathe, boss. You look like you're about to pass out." "I'm fine," Cole said, though his hands were shaking. "You're marrying the woman you love. Of course you're not fine. That's normal." The church had filled with more people than Cole expected. Their workers, of course, but also Henderson and his wife, Reverend Matthew's family, and at least 24 townspeople who'd heard the story of the cowboy and the woman he'd saved from the ruins. Everyone wanted to witness the happy ending. Then the music started, and Lydia appeared at the back of the church on Frank's arm. Cole's breath caught in his throat. She was radiant in her cream-colored dress, her dark hair swept up with small wildflowers tucked into it, her face glowing with happiness. As she walked down the aisle toward him, Cole felt tears prick his eyes. This was real. This was happening. This woman, strong, beautiful, extraordinary, had chosen him, had saved him just as surely as he'd saved her. When Lydia reached his side and took his hand, she whispered, "You're crying." "Happy tears," Cole whispered back. "The happiest I've ever cried." Reverend Matthews began the ceremony, but Cole barely heard the words. He was too focused on Lydia's face, on the way she looked at him like he was her entire world. When it came time for vows, his voice was steady and sure. "Lydia Warren, I vow to love you through every storm and every sunrise. I vow to be your partner in all things, to value your strength and support you in weakness. I vow to build a life with you that honors what we've both survived and celebrates what we've found together. I vow to never take for granted the gift of your love and your presence in my life. From this day forward, you're my wife, my partner, and my home." Lydia was crying openly now, but smiling through her tears. When it was her turn, her voice was soft but clear. "Cole Merrick, I vow to love you with everything I have and everything I am. I vow to be your equal partner, your trusted friend, and your devoted wife. I vow to honor the man who saved my life by living that life fully and joyfully beside you. I vow to build our dreams together, to face challenges together, and to celebrate victories together. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me purpose when I'd lost everything. And now I give you my heart, my hand, and my future. From this day forward, you're my husband, my partner, and my home." When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Cole pulled Lydia close and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that the entire church was watching. This was his wife, his partner, his everything. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers. As they walked back down the aisle together, Cole caught Jack Porter wiping his eyes and pretending he had dust in them. The celebration afterward was held at Henderson's General Store, which he'd closed for the afternoon and decorated with ribbons and flowers. Tables had been set up outside loaded with food that the townswomen had prepared. Someone had a fiddle, another had a guitar, and soon music filled the air. Cole danced with his wife, while their friends and neighbors clapped and cheered. Lydia laughed with pure joy, her face flushed and happy, and Cole thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful in his life. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and headed back to their ranch, to their home. The workers had tactfully made themselves scarce, camping at the far end of the property to give the newlyweds privacy for their wedding night. Cole carried Lydia over the threshold of their home, both of them laughing like children. He set her down gently in the middle of their living room and just looked at her, hardly believing this was real. "What?" Lydia asked, still smiling. "I'm just thinking about how I almost rode past your homestead that day. I was tired, it was getting dark, and I almost decided the smoke could wait until morning. If I had—" He shook his head. "But you didn't," Lydia said, crossing to him and taking his hands. "You rode toward that smoke. You pulled me from the ruins. You refused to let me give up. And now we're here, Cole, standing in our home, married, with our whole future ahead of us." "Our whole future?" Cole repeated, pulling her close. "I like the sound of that." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet of their new home, feeling the weight and wonder of everything they'd survived and everything they'd built together. "Thank you," Lydia said softly. "For what?" "For telling me that breathing was enough, for believing I could survive when I didn't believe it myself, for giving me a reason to keep living." She pulled back to look up at him. "You saved my life in every way a person can be saved, Cole Merrick." "No," Cole said, cupping her face in his hands. "We saved each other." And he kissed his wife as the last light of day faded and the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had watched over them that first night when everything had seemed lost and impossible. The months that followed were hard work, but filled with joy. The ranch took shape around them, growing from dream to reality. They purchased their first cattle in October, 30 head of good breeding stock that would form the foundation of their herd. The Porter brothers agreed to stay on permanently as ranch hands, and Billy matured from eager boy to capable worker. Cole and Lydia fell into a rhythm of partnership that worked beautifully. They made decisions together, solved problems together, and celebrated victories together. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch of their home and watch the sun set over their land, often in comfortable silence, sometimes talking about plans for expansion or dreams for the future. Winter came, mild by most standards, but still cold enough to test their preparations. The house proved warm and solid, the livestock survived well, and by the time spring arrived, Lydia had news that made both of them weep with joy. "I'm pregnant," she told Cole one morning in April, her eyes shining. "We're going to have a baby." Cole swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." "Assuming you don't injure me first by spinning me around like that," Lydia said, but she was grinning. Throughout her pregnancy, Cole was impossibly protective, trying to keep her from doing any heavy work. Lydia indulged him to a point, but insisted on maintaining her role in running the ranch. They compromised, with Lydia handling the business and planning aspects while Cole and their workers handled the physical labor. The baby arrived on a cold December evening, delivered by Mrs. Henderson, who'd come from Riverton to assist. It was a girl, healthy, loud, and perfect in every way. As Cole held his daughter for the first time, looking down at her tiny face, he felt something in his chest expand almost painfully. "Hope," Lydia said softly from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "Hope Merrick." "Hope," Cole repeated, his voice breaking. "Welcome to the world, little one. You're going to love it here." 3 years later, Cole stood on a hill overlooking the ranch as the sun rose over the valley. The homestead had grown significantly. The house had been expanded, a large barn dominated the western portion of the property, and multiple outbuildings dotted the landscape. Cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures, and smoke rose from the chimneys of the workers' cabins. But it wasn't the physical growth that made Cole's chest tighten with emotion. It was the sound of laughter floating up from the house, Lydia's laugh mixing with 3-year-old Hope's giggle as they played before breakfast. It was the knowledge that later today, their workers would arrive for a celebration because the ranch had turned its first real profit, enough to expand the herd and hire 2 more hands. It was the weight of Lydia's wedding ring on his finger and the band of gold she wore on hers. It was the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Pa!" Hope's voice called out. "Pa, come see!" Cole turned to see his daughter running toward him as fast as her little legs could carry her, dark hair flying, Lydia following more slowly behind, her hand resting on her swollen belly. 6 months along with their second child, a boy, if Mrs. Henderson's predictions were correct. Samuel, they'd already decided. Samuel Warren Merrick. Hope crashed into Cole's legs and he scooped her up, settling her on his hip. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Mama says the cattle had babies. Can we go see the babies?" Cole looked at Lydia, who'd reached them now and was slightly out of breath. Her face was flushed, her hair escaping from its pins, and she'd never looked more beautiful. 4 new calves this morning, Lydia confirmed. The herd is growing. "Everything is growing," Cole said meaningfully, reaching out to place his free hand on her pregnant belly. "Everything we planted is bearing fruit." Lydia covered his hand with hers. "We've built something good here, haven't we?" "We've built something extraordinary," Cole corrected. "Something that will last long after we're gone. Something Samuel would be proud of." "He would be," Lydia agreed, her eyes misting. "I felt his presence yesterday when I was working in the garden, like he was watching over us, happy about what we've created." Hope squirmed in Cole's arms. "Uncle Samuel in heaven?" "That's right, sweetheart," Lydia said, touching her daughter's cheek. "He's in heaven watching over all of us." "With Grandma and Grandpa?" Hope asked, referencing the grandparents she'd never met but knew through stories. "With Grandma and Grandpa," Cole confirmed, "and they're all very proud of you." They stood there for a moment, the 3 of them plus the child not yet born, looking out over the land they'd built from nothing. The land that had been purchased with grief and watered with tears but had grown into something beautiful and lasting. "Do you ever think about that day?" Lydia asked softly. "The day you found me?" "Every day," Cole admitted. "How could I not? That was the day my real life began." "Mine too," Lydia said. She turned to look at him, love shining in her eyes. "You told me that breathing was enough, that as long as I was still alive, there was hope. You were right, Cole. As long as we're breathing, there's always a chance for something beautiful." "Pa, I'm breathing," Hope announced proudly, demonstrating with exaggerated breaths. Both parents laughed, and Cole kissed his daughter's forehead. "Yes, you are, sweetheart. Keep breathing. Keep living. That's all we can ever do." As they walked back toward the house together, Cole carrying Hope, Lydia's hand in his, the sun crested the horizon fully, bathing the valley in golden light. The ranch awakened around them, workers emerging from cabins, cattle lowing in the distance, chickens clucking in their yard. It was the sound of life, of purpose, of home. That evening, after Hope had been tucked into bed and the day's work was done, Cole and Lydia sat on their porch as they'd done countless times before. Lydia's head rested on Cole's shoulder, his arm around her, the baby kicking occasionally against his side where it pressed against her belly. "Tell me again," Lydia said softly. "Tell me what you said that day in the ruins." Cole knew what she meant. He pressed a kiss to her hair and spoke the words that had changed both their lives. "You're still breathing. That's enough." "And you were right," Lydia said. "It was enough. That one breath, then another, then another. Each one brought me closer to this moment, to this life, to you." "To us," Cole corrected, placing his hand on her belly where their son grew. "To our family, our home, our future." "To us," Lydia agreed, lacing her fingers through his. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over them through tragedy and triumph, through pain and healing, through the journey from strangers to partners to lovers to husband and wife. Those stars had seen a cowboy find a woman in the ruins and refuse to let her die. They'd seen 2 broken people piece themselves back together, not alone but side by side. They'd witnessed the building of something beautiful from the ashes of something terrible, and now those stars bore witness to the result of it all, a ranch that thrived, a family that loved, and 2 people who'd learned the most important lesson of all, that hope isn't found in the absence of suffering, but in the choice to keep breathing through it, to keep building despite it, to keep loving in defiance of it. The frontier remained hard and unforgiving, as it always had been. But Cole and Lydia Merrick had learned to be harder and more forgiving in return. They'd learned that strength wasn't the absence of breaking, but the courage to heal. That home wasn't just a place, but the people you built it with. That love wasn't a luxury for those untouched by tragedy, but a necessity for those who'd survived it. As Cole held his wife on the porch of the home they'd built together, listening to their daughter's soft breathing through the open window and feeling his unborn son move under his palm, he thought back to that afternoon 2 months ago when a traveling preacher had stopped by the ranch. The man had admired what they'd built and asked Cole the secret to their success. Cole had looked at Lydia, who'd been teaching Hope to plant seeds in the garden, both of them laughing as dirt flew everywhere, and he'd given the only answer that mattered. "We saved each other," he'd said simply, "and then we built a life worth saving." That was the truth of it, the whole truth. Not just his story, or Lydia's story, but their story. A testament to the power of refusing to quit breathing, of finding hope in the ruins, of building something beautiful from broken pieces. The ranch would continue to grow. Hope would grow up strong and capable, learning to work the land alongside her parents. Samuel would be born healthy and loud, inheriting his uncle's name and his mother's determination. There would be challenges ahead, drought and disease, market fluctuations and hard winters, all the inevitable struggles of frontier life. But Cole and Lydia would face them together, the way they'd faced everything else. Partners in all things, equal owners not just of land and cattle, but of dreams and hopes, and a future built on the foundation of their shared past. And on quiet evenings like this one, when the work was done and their family was safe and the stars stretched overhead into infinity, they would sit together and remember. Remember the ruins and the rescue. Remember the fever and the healing. Remember the moment when two broken people looked at each other and decided that breathing was enough, that survival was enough, that together they could build something worth living for. They would remember, and they would be grateful. Grateful for the breath in their lungs, the love in their hearts, and the life they'd created from the ashes of everything they'd lost. Because that's what life was, really. Not the absence of tragedy, but the presence of hope. Not the avoidance of pain, but the courage to keep building despite it. Not the guarantee of happiness, but the choice to keep breathing, keep trying, keep loving until those breaths become moments, those moments become days, and those days become a life worth living. A life like the one Cole and Lydia Merrick had built together, one breath at a time.